Adding and subtracting fractions for 4th grade math. So here I've chosen 2 different content standards that relate to this lesson on fractions, and the first is for the students to be able to understand addition and subtraction of fractions as joining and separating parts referring to the same whole. And the second is for them to be able to add and subtract mixed numbers with like denominators, like by replacing each mixed number with an equivalent fraction, and or by using properties of operations and the relationship between addition and subtraction. So basically our objectives here are for the students to learn how to add and subtract fractions with the same denominators, or if the denominators are not the same, for the students to know how to find the equivalent fractions to then be able to go from there and add and subtract the problems, and for the students to understand that fractions do make up parts of a whole. So academic language is language specific to your content area that is at hand, and here we have a few terms that would be taught throughout the lesson to the students. The first is numerator, which is the number above the line in a common fraction that shows how many of the parts are taken. So for example, it would be the 2 2/3. A denominator is the number below the line in a common fraction. This is when 2 or more fractions have the same denominator, again, the number on the bottom, they have a common denominator. And we can only add and subtract fractions when they have this common denominator. Now, the next 2 are parts and whole, and fractions themselves are parts of a whole, and the bottom number, again, the denominator, says how many parts the whole is divided into, while the top number, the numerator, says how many parts we have total. And this last one, equivalent fraction, is just 2 fractions that are equal. So in this example, 3/4 would have the equivalent fraction of 6/8, for example, and 1/2 could equal to 2/4. Now, language function describes how the teacher and the students incorporate specific terms into the lesson. So here we have described how both the numerator and the denominator are needed to make a fraction. Compare different fractions to each other to discover the common denominator. Examine models and pictures to draw the conclusion that parts combine to make a whole. And compare different fractions to find equivalent amounts. So, to introduce the lesson, it's very important to grab the attention of the students right away. And one good way of doing this is by connecting the concept that you're learning, the math concept of fractions here, to everyday life in a way that's relatable to the lives of the students. So one good way of doing that is by using the example of a pizza. So now to start the lesson, we'll start with parts of a whole. So say there's one whole pizza, and if you cut it in half, there'd be 2 halves to make a whole. So this is again applicable to their lives, because if 2 students wanted to order a pizza and one really wanted cheese and one really wanted pepperoni, they could order a pizza that's half cheese and half pepperoni, and that is using fractions to make a whole. Now here, if you cut the pizza into 4 slices, as it is in this picture, there would then be 4 pieces used to make that whole. Now to share the pizza, so let's say you had a pizza all to yourself, but a friend asked for a piece. Now, if you had 6 pieces of pizza and gave one away, as this picture shows, there's 6 pieces total, and the one on the right is the one being given away, what would that look like? So the equation here is 6/6, that's one whole, that's the entire pizza, minus 1/6, that's the piece that's alone on the right, and that gives you 5 pieces left. 5/6 is the answer. So if we're adding fractions here with like denominators, with denominators that are the same, we have 1/4 plus 1/4. So there's just that one slice added together for each of those 1/4. That gives you 2/4, which is half of a pizza. Now here, these last 2 is an example of an equivalent fraction, because 2/4 is the answer from adding 1/4 plus 1/4, but 1/2 is the same. It's the same amount of pizza, but it is a simplified version of that fraction. So now more fraction addition. We have, for adding fractions, if the denominators are the same, you again can just add the numerators together to get the answer. The denominator stays the same always. So here for the first example on the top here, we have 2/4 plus 1/4 equals 3/4, and the denominator stays the same, but you add 2 plus 1 equals 3 to give you 3/4. On the bottom we have 1/5 plus 2/5 equals 3/5. So now if the denominators are different, you need to find a common denominator. So you cannot add 1/2 plus 1/3 here. The denominator needs to be the same. So we can find that 6 is something that can be multiplied to find the common denominator here. So for 1/2, you multiply both the top and the bottom by 3 to get you 3/6. And for 1/3, you multiply both the top and the bottom by 2 to get you 2/6, which makes us have the common denominator. And we're able then to add 3/6 plus 2/6 equals 5/6. Now, fraction subtraction. If the denominators are the same, subtract the numerators and keep the denominators the same to find the answer. Just like addition, the denominators stay the same. So here we have 3/4 minus 2/4 equals 1/4. Again, 4s all across the board on the bottom. And the top is just like a regular subtraction problem. 3 minus 2 equals 1 gives you 1/4. Now back to our pizza example. If you had 7 pieces of pizza and you give away 2, how many would you have left? So here we have 7 pieces of pizza, 2 being taken away, and 5 pieces are left. Again, the bottom numerator stays the same, and we have 7 minus 2, which would give you 5/8. Now for subtracting fractions without a common denominator, you need to find equivalent fractions. So here we have 1/2, which is the same as 2/4. So you see in the first picture it's just cut in half, but you can tell it's the same amount of pizza even though the second picture is cut into 4 equal quadrants. Now both of those are also equal to this, 4/8. Same amount of pizza, just more slices, more pieces. Now from here, now that you know what equivalent fractions are, you can subtract. So if you're taking 1/2 minus 3/8, you cannot do that because the denominators are not the same. But we know from the previous slide that 1/2 is the same as 2/4 is the same as 4/8. So 1/2 minus 3/8, the initial problem, is the same as 4/8 minus 3/8. And we know that 4 minus 3 is 1, which gets you that final answer of 1/8.